Practical Anarchy, A Guide to Self-Determination. Dickie Dredd. Section 28, A Case Study. Scandinavia. Scandinavian countries, Denmark, Norway, Sweden, Finland, and by extension Iceland, are often held up as model states. Politicians in the UK and the US love to point at them as proof that capitalism with a human face is possible. Here are nations with high living standards, robust welfare systems, generous parental leave and healthcare that doesn't bankrupt you. Looks like the state can work if you just get the formula right. It's true that social democracy in Scandinavia softened many of the harder edges of capitalism. Strong unions, progressive taxation, and public services created societies the more equal than most. In the post-war decades, Sweden in particular became a symbol of how collective bargaining and welfare could deliver security. The Nordic model reassured the world you don't have to choose between capitalism and socialism. You can have both. But even in these model states, hierarchy never disappeared. It has just managed more smoothly. The state still held coercive power through police, prisons and surveillance. Wealth still accumulated at the top, even if taxation redistributed some of it. Corporations remained central to the economy, their profits subsidised by public infrastructure. The social contract was not an end to domination, but a compromise. Accept the state, and the state will soften its blows. Today, cracks are showing. Privatisation has been creeping in across Nordic countries, healthcare outsourcing in Sweden, market reforms in Denmark, and pension restructuring in Norway. Immigration debates reveal how even tolerant societies can turn to scapegoating. Sweden's once praised openness has given way to rising far-right politics, fueled by claims that migrants are draining welfare or undermining social cohesion. Inequality, while still lower than elsewhere, has been rising steadily since the 1990s. Sweden's Gini coefficient rose from 0.2 in 1980 to around 0.28 in 2020, making it one of the fastest increases in inequality in the developed world. Iceland, often admired for jailing bankers after the 2008 crash, still operates within the same global capitalist framework. Tourism and aluminium dominate the economy, and its housing market has pushed many young people out of Reykjavik. Another often overlooked aspect of Scandinavian social democracy is alcohol control. State monopolies such as Systembolaget in Sweden or Vinmonopolet in Norway control sales of strong beer, wine and spirits. Officially, this is about public health, curbing alcoholism and limiting harm, but it also reveals the paternalistic side of the Nordic model. The state decides what you can drink, when and at what price. Alcohol taxes and monopoly revenues remain a significant fiscal tool. Equally overlooked is the role of the arms trade. Sweden is consistently among the world's top exporters of weapons per capita. In 2014 it was the third largest in the world, with arms exports per person at approximately $53 US. In 2024, Sweden's export of military equipment reached a record 29 billion krona, a 63% increase over the previous year, with over 70% going to EU partners and other allies, yet significant shipments also went to authoritarian regimes such as United Arab Emirates. Saab, the country's flagship defence company, has seen huge demand for its Gripen fighter jets, Carl Gustaf and NLAW anti-tank weapons, and advanced radar systems, with the Ukraine war driving record sales. Norway too profits from arms alongside oil wealth, while Denmark and Finland contribute to Europe's defence industry. Behind the image of peace and equality sits an economy tied to weapons production and export. As stated above, politicians in the UK and the US love to cite Scandinavia as a model, but their appeals are selective. In the UK, Labour occasionally gestures towards Nordic-style welfare, while Conservatives hold up Sweden's privatised schools as proof of market efficiency. In the US, Bernie Sanders pointed to Denmark and Sweden as examples of how universal healthcare and education could work, while opponents use the same examples to argue that even socialist states use markets. Yet both sets of politicians miss the deeper truth. these are still capitalist states, with all the contradictions that implies. The lesson is clear. The Nordic model shows that states can manage capitalism better than most, but some can. But they cannot abolish its contradictions. Welfare can buffer exploitation, but it cannot erase hierarchy. Immigration tensions, creeping privatisation, inequality, paternalistic alcohol controls, and reliance on weapons production all prove that even model states cannot escape the gravity of profit and power. As anarchists argue, the problem is not how generous the state is, it is that the state exists at all. Section 29. Case Study. The Populist Turn. Starting in 2010s, a wave of populism has swept across the globe. Trump in the US, Brexit in the UK, Bolsonaro in Brazil, Orban in Hungary, all claim to speak for the people against corrupt elites. The irony is that most of these figures were themselves wealthy, backed by billionaires or multinational networks, and committed to strengthening the very state structures they rallied against. Trump's campaign slogan, "Drain the Swamp," promised to break elite control, but his administration funneled tax cuts to corporations, gutted environmental protections for industry, and stuffed the White House with billionaires and lobbyists. He attacked the fake news media while rewarding sympathetic outlets, undermining public health advice during COVID-19 pandemic, and flirted openly with white nationalist rhetoric. Far from dismantling elite power, Trump deepened it. Wall Street thrived, oil companies profited, and military budgets soared. Brexit was sold as a rebellion against Brussels bureaucrats, led by figures like Nigel Farage and later Boris Johnson. But the real beneficiaries have been hedge funds betting against the pound, deregulated markets, and a class of politicians closely tied to global finance. Taking back control meant little more than shifting it from one set of elites to another. Johnson wrapped himself in populist language, playing the clownish man of the people, but presided over corruption scandals, contracts for cronies during COVID-19, and a deepening inequality gap. The paradox is central to the populist turn. States mobilise anti-elite rhetoric precisely to shore up elite power. By convincing people that they are fighting a cultural war against immigrants, against woke values, against bureaucrats, rulers keep attention away from structural inequality. Rishi Sunak, himself a multimillionaire and former hedge fund partner, posed as the man to deliver common-sense governance while defending austerity and pro-business policies. Keir Starmer brands Labour as a party of responsibility, signalling to business elites that their interests are safe, even as he dampens grassroots demands for redistribution. The debate over wokeness is a perfect distraction. In the US, Ron DeSantis rails against woke schools and census curricula, while in the UK Conservative MPs perform outrage over gender-neutral toilets and university events. Arguments about whether a trans student can use a particular bathroom or whether a controversial speaker should be allowed to lecture are elevated into national crises. Liberals, meanwhile, often embrace the language of wokeness as a badge of virtue, offering symbolic inclusivity while leaving structural inequality untouched. Either way, the culture war drags attention away from the real war, the systematic transfer of wealth and power upwards. Why then do people who fought for freedom so often end up supporting strongmen and dictators? Part of the answer lies in fear, economic insecurity, rapid social change. Migration and climate anxiety produce fertile ground for promises of order and strength. History shows this clearly. The Weimar Republic's instability allowed Hitler to present dictatorship as the cure for chaos. His rhetoric hinged on a simple formula: a pure people betrayed by corrupt elites, humiliated by outsiders, and redeemed only through strong leadership. In 1922, Hitler declared, "The German people have been betrayed by a clique of November criminals. Only through discipline and unity can we restore our greatness." Nearly a century later, Trump told his supporters, "Our movement is about replacing a failed and corrupt political establishment. We are transferring power from Washington, D.C. and giving it back to you, the people." Farage echoed the same formula during the Brexit campaign. "This is your victory. The people have fought against the multinationals, the big merchant banks, the big politics, and we have won." The parallels are chilling. Sorry about the attempt accents. The parallels are chilling. Hitler cast Jews, Marxists and cosmopolitans as the treacherous elites destroying the nation. Today's populists substitute globalists, woke bureaucrats or Brussels. The labels change, but the scapegoating logic is identical. The lesson is stark. Freedom is fragile when fear dominates. Populism sells itself as liberation from elites, yet it delivers obedience to new elites, often more authoritarian than the last. Anarchists warn that so long as the state exists, populism will remain a tool to recycle power, dressing domination in the clothes of rebellion. Conspiracy theories as distraction. Alongside culture wars, conspiracy theories provide another powerful diversion. From chemtrails to 5G masts, from the claim that COVID-19 vaccines contain tracking devices to the idea of a secret world government, these stories flourish in the cracks left by a deeply distrusted state. In one sense, they reflect something real. People know they're being lied to and manipulated, so they grasp alternative explanations. The targets are misplaced. Instead of confronting the structural forces of capitalism, surveillance and state violence, energy is channeled into chasing shadows. The state and media, for their part, are quick to weaponise this. By amplifying the most outlandish conspiracies, they discredit all forms of dissent. Anyone questioning government policy can be tarred with the same brush as a flat earther or anti-vaxxer. In this way, conspiracy theories serve a double purpose. They drain anger away from genuine critique, and they provide elites with an easy way to dismiss critics as irrational. COVID-19 showed this dynamic starkly. While governments mishandled the crisis, underfunded healthcare, and channeled billions to private contractors, public debate was often hijacked by disputes over microchips in vaccines or imagined plots of population control. The real scandal? Systematic neglect and profiteering was buried under noise. For anarchists, the lesson is clear. Distrust the state is justified. But conspiratorial thinking offers no path to liberation. It replaces solidarity with suspicion, analysis with paranoia. The challenge is to expose the structural truths, exploitation, hierarchy, corruption, without falling for the false lights of conspiracy. This theme will resurface later. In Chapter 6, we will see how conspiracy theories share the same psychological terrain as religion, offering certainty and enemies in a chaotic world. And in the chapters on the internet, we will trace how algorithms, echo chambers and surveillance capitalism turbocharge these beliefs, making conspiracy not just a sideshow, but a profitable industry of distraction. Resistance and alternatives. Section 30. Against the seemingly overwhelming power of the state, history gives us countless examples of people building forms of life beyond or against it. These examples, both historical and contemporary, show that the state is not inevitable, and that societies can and do organise themselves without rulers. Historically, many indigenous communities lived without centralised authority, from the Igbo in Nigeria to the Haudenosaunee Confederacy in North America. Councils, federations and consensus making allowed decisions to be made collectively. Colonial authorities dismissed these societies primitive or chaotic, but anthropologists later showed that they embodied sophisticated self-governance rooted in reciprocity, kinship, mutual aid. More recent history gives us vivid case studies. The Spanish collectives of 1936 demonstrated that farms, factories and even whole cities could be run on principles of direct democracy, federation and equality. The Zapatistas in Chiapas, Mexico, since 1994 have built autonomous municipalities with their own schools, clinics and assemblies, showing that alternative governance can flourish even under constant pressure from the state. Rojava in northern Syria has provided another contemporary example, an experiment in democratic confederalism inspired by Murray Bookchin's ideas, mixing feminism, ecology and self-rule, all under the shadow of war and invasion. Closer to everyday life, we can see resistance and alternatives in small-scale practices. Squats, housing co-ops, travellers' camps, mutual aid networks and community gardens all expose how unnecessary the state often is. These initiatives won't wait for permission or licensing. They emerge from people's needs, creativity and solidarity. When Grenfell Tower burned in 2017, it was not the council or central government that stepped in first, but local networks of volunteers organising food, shelter and support. That was anarchism in practice, even if it was not called that. What unites these examples is the way they expose the state's claim to necessity as hollow. Governments insist that without their laws, police and bureaucrats, society would collapse into chaos. But every time people self-organise, whether in disaster relief, workers' cooperatives or autonomous zones, they prove the opposite. Authority is not the same as order. Rules do not require rulers. Anarchist practice show that the state's role is not to enable society, but to constrain it, direct and dominate it. Resistance and alternatives remind us that the burden of proof always lies with authority, to justify why it deserves obedience, and that, time and again, people have managed to live and thrive without it. Chapter conclusion: why the state is the problem. By now the picture should be clear. The state sells itself as inevitable, the guardian of order, the provider of welfare, the referee that keeps us from each other's throats. But history and lived experience tell us a different story. The state is not the foundation of society, it is a cage placed around it. We have seen how the state justifies itself with myths, Hobbes' fantasy of life without rulers being nasty, brutish and short, the democratic illusion that your vote shifts the structures of power, the scapegoating of immigrants and the poor to mask structural failure. We've seen how states wield violence through armies, police, prisons and surveillance, not as aberrations but as core functions. We've seen how capitalism and the state are entwined, governments propping up banks and corporations funding governments in return, each feeding off each other. Even the model states of Scandinavia cannot escape this logic. They often soften hierarchy, but they still rely on prisons, police, military exports and increasing privatisation. Modern populism only sharpens the lesson. Whether in Trump's America, Johnson's Brexit Britain or Orban's Hungary, the state wears the marks of rebellion while serving elites. Cultural wars distract from class wars. And when crises come, Grenfell, Katrina, COVID-19, it's not the state that saves us but ordinary people organising themselves, anarchically, without permission. The problem is not simply bad rulers or corrupt politicians. It's the very structure of the state itself, centralised power, backed by coercion, sustained by inequality. The state cannot be fixed by swapping faces at the top, because its function is domination. It divides, it scapegoats, it promises fairness while delivering hierarchy. This is why anarchists insist that the state is the problem. Until we face that truth, every reform will turn sour, every revolution will harden into a new hierarchy. And this sets the stage for what follows. If the state is the cage, what are the bars made of? Three stand out: money, wage slavery and religion. Each has been a pillar of state power, each a tool of control dressed up as necessity. Money pretends to be neutral exchange but becomes debt and domination. Work pretends to be freedom but becomes compulsion, wage slavery. Religion pretends to be spiritual solace but too often has blessed kings, empires and armies. In the next chapters we will strip these pillars bare. By unmasking money, wage slavery and religion, we will see not just how the state survives, but how we might finally step beyond it.